Hello and welcome to In a Spiritual Sense, where we discuss all things spiritual. From growing your intuition, speaking with spirit guides, diving into past lives, the paranormal, and more, join me, Stacey Piagno, where we work to bridge the gap between science and spirit. Hello and welcome back to In a Spiritual Sense. I'm your host, Stacey Piagno, and today is all about you. This is an episode I've been really excited to do as I've been talking to those around me because I realize you guys have questions, and I want to do my best to share my perspective on them. So today I have accumulated all the questions that you guys have sent in. We have a lot. And without further ado, in no particular order, let's jump into some fun topics. Okay, so to start us off, the first question is, how does someone start getting spiritual? Well, just the fact that you asked this shows that you have interest with your connection with spirit, which I think is a direct indication that you've already begun the process. I think something important to explain, though, is that we're never not spiritual because we are spirits. I think people try to compartmentalize things with the physical mind. Therefore, we think being spiritual is something separate than us or something that we're not already doing. But to me, the biggest piece of being spiritual lies in the awareness we have of living in our truest self. So to reframe your question, how do we become spiritual in my mind is like, how do I become more of me? And we become more of ourselves by following our interests. I think one tangible piece of advice I would give is to make sure that you are giving yourself alone time. And whether you spend that alone time sitting in silence or being creative or filling it with something that makes you feel joyful is what I would recommend starting with and doing more of and making that a part of your routine. I think once you give yourself time to spend with you, that in itself is starting you on your spiritual path. And just being conscious of what you're thinking and feeling as you're doing things that either align with you or don't align with you is the starting point. Spirit is always with us and always guiding us. And we just have to pay attention and stay true to our thoughts and feelings and interests. So I hope that helps. Okay, next question. I have a few that were similar, so I'm wrapping them into one chunk. First, what should we do if we feel a spirit speaking to us? Are there signs we can pay attention to around us to help us know if it is a spirit? And last, how can we decipher between light and dark spirits? Okay, so first, what to do if we think we feel a spirit speaking to us? State your intention, ask questions, and listen to your senses. I think you have to determine if you're first interested in communicating with spirit or not. And that's what I mean when I say state your intention. If you don't want any part of it, make that clear. Give boundaries and state what it is you want. And I would recommend, regardless of you wanting or not wanting to communicate, that you place an intention on protecting your energy anyways. And the simplest way to do this is through the confidence of your intention. Yes, you can use natural items and elements to help with protection. There's black tourmaline, salts, crystals, herbal smoke, the list can go on and on. But you don't have to use those to be protected. Again, grounded spirits who have passed are no different than people. We have people with good intentions, and we have people with bad intentions. If you feel like there's a spirit there, act as if it were a person. And the answer for what you do may be dependent on where you are. And this is where your boundaries are going to come into play. So if you're in your house, the answer for what you do might be different than if you were out at a park. But once you figure out your boundaries and what is and is not acceptable for you, then I would maybe ask, who are you? Where do you come from? And just really pay attention to your senses and those very next initial thoughts. Like, what is the gut thought that first pops into your knowing? And sometimes that takes time to practice noticing what first comes to you, but usually there's an answer in that. And this is where it's going to be beneficial for you to understand your learning style. Do you see things better because you're visual? Are you more auditory? Are you a feeler? So maybe you just feel good and bad and high and low energy. That will be for you to play around with a little bit. But I would say if you're interested in communicating, just start with closing your eyes and observing your senses and see what it is you see or feel or hear. And don't be judgmental within that. Like in the most sensitive way, just pay attention and trust everything that you sense. Don't disregard it as your own thinking. Don't worry about if you're making it up, and see what happens. As far as signs to pay attention to, if we're talking about ghosts or grounded spirits, as I like to say, there's lots of different ways they can come through. And if you're interested in this, we talk a lot about it on the Halloween episodes from last season. But visually, spirits can show up as shadows. They could be apparitions, which is when you see the figure itself, whether partially or fully. I've heard stories of that figure either being in color or more of a smoky grayscale. You could see an orb, which is more or less a little ball of light or color that represents the soul, or energy ribbons, which is the same idea, but it's more of a moving spirit. So you're going to see like a flashing light. Again, it could be in that white or it could be in another color. Or sometimes you'll see things in your mind's eye, which is a bit different for everyone, and it's hard to explain, but it's like an idea of seeing something followed by a complete knowing. And when I see things in my mind's eye, this is what it feels like. Sometimes I will see things with my eyes closed. Sometimes it will appear as like a quick daydream that feels different from your normal daydream. Or sometimes you'll just get an idea of a feeling that you are being watched, or like someone is standing in a particular area. That happens to me a lot because I'm more of a feeler with grounded spirits versus necessarily being able to see them with my physical eye. But I have gotten a quick glimpse of spirits before, followed by that complete knowing that I was just talking about. But normally I can feel spirits, whether they're standing behind me or over in that corner or that kind of thing. So I can speak more to that, but again, I worked in the ghost tour industry for over 10 years, and I've heard and witnessed a lot. Some other things you can pay attention to are smells. I always use the example of smelling your grandmother's perfume even though she's been passed, or smelling cigar or cigarette smoke from someone who's also been dead. Those are really common examples of smell. And if you're out and about, I would also recommend taking pictures if you're feeling like there's a spirit there. Because when we used to be out on tour, we would always have people take tons of pictures, and we would actually recommend that they take them in quick bursts, and you'll be surprised what you can capture. Lots of orbs and energy ribbons come through this way, and you can see them move on a burst, which is why we recommend taking more than one photo. Because if you see an orb or energy ribbon, for example, moving per frame, that's something that we like to pay a lot of attention to, versus if you take a burst and this orb supposedly stays in the same place, that's where we can debunk that and see it as more of a glare within your camera. However, I personally would not take pictures in my house just because I do not want to see or call in anything in my own home. That's just my personal preference. So that's up to you. And as far as the light and dark energy, if you're not getting a good vibe, it's probably dark. Close yourself off, go shower, sage a little, and you're good. If you do like the vibe, however, invite it in. Just stick with your boundaries and listen to your body, and it will give you information. Humans don't realize it, but we are natural antennas. We can pick up on the vibe of people and energy. Remember, people, whether dead or alive, give off energy. I mean, their soul will. And we are way more receptive than we think. We can pick up on more than we give ourselves credit for. We just have to retrain ourselves how to observe. So, treat any ghost like a person, and think, what would you do if you came across a person? Also, I work a lot with my spirit guides, and supposedly, if you ask, it will better open the communication between you and them, or you and it. You know, ask and you shall receive. There's a lot of truth behind that. So ask your guides for guidance or help, or just for protection. You know, you can ask them to be a filter for you. So maybe they will help block anything negative and help invite in anything that's beneficial for you. I do that a lot, and it helps me feel comfortable and more confident in my boundaries. Again, your confidence with what you're putting out will be the strength of the boundary at place. So those are my thoughts on grounded spirits. And here's a good one for after that. Can anybody be psychic, or is it only for those with the gift? Okay, this is just my opinion on this one, and I always hear people answer this differently. One thing I'll ask is, by psychic, do you mean able to foresee the future, or just able to communicate and tap in with spirit, which is what I would label as more of a medium, because I see those as two different things. And I'm still a student, but as far as psychicness, I do believe certain people have more of a gift. And I think people who are psychics are also mediums, but I don't necessarily think people who are mediums are psychic. Also, something that I want to mention about reading the future is that when psychics are predicting the future, What they are predicting is just the future of your current path based on the frequencies you are putting out at the moment the psychic is reading you. Because the future is extremely mutable, and we are constantly changing our very futures with every thought we have and with every choice we make. So nothing predicted is ever set in stone. And sometimes just us hearing the current projection of our path can allow us to change that path or continue manifesting it. It depends if we like what we hear or not. But I also believe the more prophetic side of things is something that is a part of one's soul purpose for the duration of their current life, and therefore can be seen as more of a gift during that time. Because I do think when we are all in spirit form, we all have the capability to communicate in both prophetic ways and telepathically, which would be like mediumship, because that's how spirit communicates. But I think it's part of a soul's plan whether or not it will be activated for them in their physical life. And that means they can either be born into it or discover it later in life. As far as mediumship and understanding things telepathically or just purely communicating with spirit, again, whether spirit be ghosts or guides or angels or God or nature, I very strongly believe we all have that ability. That's actually what I strive to teach people, is how to activate that. And I do think some are born with that quality being more open, and some have to work harder on it. And I think a big part of that, usually not always, is based on one's interest of it and or their environment. Therefore, it's connected to their soul's plan. Because if someone is interested in it and wants to learn, 100%, I believe they can. And I think this way of being and communicating was once way more common and thriving in ancient societies, and it's been lost. But it's something anyone can learn to pick up on if they want. It's all about how connected you allow yourself to be. And again, if it's part of your life's plan. So how much you want to develop that is going to have a big part in your access to it. Hopefully that makes sense. That's my opinion. Okay. Next, I have 2 about dreams, so I'm going to answer them together. The first one is, how much of our dreams involve spirits? And the second is, how do we know if our dreams are literal or symbolic? And I feel like these kind of go hand in hand. So okay, obviously this is another opinion of mine, because truthfully the answer lies within it is what you deem it to be. But from my experience with dreaming, as far as how much of our dreams involve spirits and whether or not it's literal or symbolic, it's such a hard question to pinpoint, but I think most of the time when we dream, even if we're lucid, I think it's symbolic and therefore less of an actual spirit. And I actually go into this on the Spiritual Experiences episode, which just recently came out. So if you haven't heard that one, I discuss this a lot. But what I notice when I'm dreaming, anytime I have a person or quote unquote spirit in my dream, it seems to usually be a personification of something inside of me. Like I actually just had a dream the other night where I was in the car with my family, and the advice that came from my father was to dig for rose quartz. The interpretation was that my internal father figure was directing me to produce more self-love. My masculine needs more love, versus it actually being an interaction with my dad. However, there is a state in which we sometimes experience what I would deem to be more of an astral travel, in which our spirit body is more separated from our physical body. And from what I understand, this is when we become more prone to experiencing other spirits. And it feels very much like dreaming. And I really don't know if I'm going to be able to answer this with certainty, because I've also had actual spirits visit me as I was dreaming as well. And I've seen my guides and angels as people in my dreams. So maybe I was astral traveling during those situations. I'm still learning. But my best answer for this, along with the differentiation of are you lucid dreaming or astral traveling, is what do you think? Do you feel like you were being visited by a spirit? And I think this is something that takes time for each of us individually to connect with, because I think it has a lot to do with our perspective of what is happening. But to start, I would say, think of it as something that is symbolic and see if that gives you any meaning. And then think about if it were to be literal and see if that gives you any meaning. I mean, the purpose of dreaming is to continue to experience life and subconsciously grow and work on things. So either way, you're gaining something just by purely remembering your dream. But I mean, sometimes you will wake up from a dream and you just know. There's no explaining it. You know someone close to you, whether past or not, was just visiting you. And if you feel that, I would say it's valid. Also, in regards to the literal or symbolic conversation, I have been asked about dreams that involve death. and if that were to be literal or symbolic. And this is really interesting to me. Again, you guys know one of my passions is dream interpretation. And so this comes up a lot. Like, hey, I dreamed I drove off the bridge in my car and died. Is that really going to happen? Again, I would say first attack it as if it were a symbolic reference. Death is so misunderstood. And really it stands for a transition, an awakening, a rebirth of some sort, or a change in direction. And again, dreams that scare us a little are meant to catch our attention. So start with this and understand you have the power to manifest and alter your future. So let's play out both sides of this scenario. If the dream was to represent a rebirthing, that will be one thing. Think about if that makes sense to what is happening in your life. Did you just go through a big change? Are you about to go through a big change? Do you need to go through a big change? What are the items and symbols in that dream? What is the setting? How did you die? These are all going to be big components in you being able to pull meaning from that experience. And if for some reason you did actually prophetically see your death, well, maybe work with it. We just spoke on prophecy and how it's a prediction of where you are on your path at this very specific moment in time. Work to change it, but don't bring more attention to it and therefore manifest it because you're fearful of it and you're constantly thinking about it. You know, I've had some pretty scary dreams before that really spooked me as far as people dying. But to this day, I really think they were symbolic, and the message was just something I had to better interpret. We also can't forget that our higher self is motherly. I remember Sam Joshi from the Quantum Healing episode used to always talk about this. Our higher self is in control, and we're not going to see or experience something that in some way is not beneficial for us. At the end of the day, dreaming is an experience. It parallels our physical life. And sometimes the dream itself is enough of an experience that we don't have to actually manifest it into the physical. So that's what I think about that. If you have lots of dreams and you don't already write them down, I would also suggest doing that and doing the research for yourself. That's how I've learned everything I've learned about dreams, by researching myself. Okay, next. What does it mean when we get goosebumps? And I had another person also ask about what it means when we get ringing in our ears. So I'm going to answer this from the more metaphysical side of life. I have no idea if there's research on this or not, but I can tell you from my experience, the goosebumps is a direct indication between spirit and I. I mean, like, yeah, you can get goosebumps when you're cold, but I've been really interested in this question, and it's one I constantly used to ask myself, so I started really paying attention to it. And I am 100% sure, at least for me, that goosebumps is a validation that spirit is with me. Like physically the vibration of that spirit or its energy is around me and within me. And I really only link this to my spirit guides because that's mainly who I choose to communicate with the most. But like I've tested this for years. When I ask to connect with my spirit guides, or again, angels, I will instantly feel goosebumps shoot down my core. And that's when I know they are listening or they're present or whatever. So I've now taken this and placed an intention on it. And that's how my guides know they can use the feeling to communicate their presence with me. Like some situations where I will receive goosebumps could again be when I initiate communication, or sometimes I'll start channeling verbally for someone and I'll get goosebumps and that feeling will start to intensify and grow and I'll know I'm channeling advice from that frequency. And sometimes when it's really strong, I'll get this heightened shiver and it feels like massive excitement and I can feel my vibration rising and expanding. But it's also somewhat subtle. And this is when I also know I'm in that channeling state or my guides are near. And just to mention about the goosebumps, I don't always get the actual bumps on my skin when this happens, but the feeling of energy you get when you have actual goosebumps is the feeling I'm talking about. So my thoughts are that goosebumps are in some way matching the frequency of the angelic realm or maybe a different high frequency realm. And I say that because that's who I know I'm speaking to when I channel and get goosebumps. But I also believe there are probably different types of goosebumps, but I think it's an energetic thing. So my advice is to start to notice where and when you get goosebumps. Like other than being cold, do you ever produce them? Is it a reaction? How do you feel that little shiver go through you? What direction is it going? When you feel anything, stop and immediately observe. See what you were just thinking, or see if anything comes through to you. Also, I've noticed I can produce that feeling of goosebumps from my core, not just receive them. which I'm still playing around with a little. But I've started to notice I can produce that same energy for myself and project it outwards versus maybe coming in contact with something and intaking it inwards. So, goosebumps. I believe there's some sort of source energy that we tap into, and I'm still learning. As far as the ringing in our ears, I think this goes along the same lines as this. I feel a little less in tune with the idea of ringing in my ears, even though it happens all the time. I've started trying to notice subtle differences, however, like is the ringing coming from my left ear or my right? Is it a high pitch frequency or a little more of that clouded blocking frequency? Because I can feel a difference between that as well. But I don't know, I feel like it's a form of communication and or the type of energy that is near us. When my ears ring, I always try to stop and observe, like I was saying with the goosebumps. And I'm trying to keep note of when it happens and what I'm doing. And I'm trying to create an intention for it so spirit can use it to communicate with me. For example, the clogging ring feels more like a heavy density or a no, which is what I'm trying to make it. And the high ringing feels more like a yes. And I'm also trying to pay attention if I have any electrical devices around me as well, because I do notice a ringing sometimes when I'm near technology, but even that is a different type of frequency. And who knows, maybe it's different for everyone, but that's just what I'm currently working with. I feel like it has to be a frequency thing. So play with it. Okay, next. This one is a little bit deeper. It says, I have small children under the age of 7, and both me and their father have separate opinions on life and spirit. It seems to be the battle of religion versus spirit, and I feel like my beliefs are often misconstrued as taboo. Their father and I are currently separated, and I worry that my children will become confused and resentful based on whose weekend it is. Yes. Okay, so this is a heavy topic. There's two things that I'm getting here that I want to discuss. One is the whole religion versus spirituality thing. And then the other is, what do you do for your children? And I'm so glad you asked this because I still feel like there is such a division between being spiritual or being religious. Religion, however, is just one way to be spiritual. We often see it as one versus the other, and we place a lot of judgment on if one way is good or bad or right or wrong. However, we are failing to see that this judgment comes from both sides. One of the arguments I hear all the time. On one side of things, spiritual ceremonies can be considered taboo or witchy. Contacting demons seems to be what some people think spirituality is all about. And then I also hear religions are out to consume and control. They are some of the most judgmental people, even though they preach otherwise. And this is the argument I hear all the time. And a big reason is because, yes, a lot of this happened in our recent history. And I do understand there is a lot of trauma from this, both currently and in the past. And I know a lot of people have been pulled away from their natural beliefs. And I think this can be very triggering for a lot of people, especially as the collective starts to transition and change. But I think it's important to make sure that we don't overswing the pendulum too far back to the opposing side, where we are also being judgmental. I mean, let's stop and take a look at where we currently are. I personally know people who are religious who don't act like that. And I know people who are religious who do act like that. I also know people who are spiritual who do and don't act like that. So what does that tell me? We are all people and we all have different opinions, even if we come from the same so-called group. In all honesty, I think everybody in the world has somewhat of a different opinion, or I'll say perspective on life. I mean, nobody thinks exactly the same all the time. We have to see that we are compartmentalizing each other too much. This group of people are all the same, and I'm going to base my opinion on all of them from my one interaction I had with someone in that group. That's what we do. Or we let the media give us information, which I'm not even going to get into. But even if it seems that we fit into a box of something, more often than not, the borders of that box are more flexible than we think. We're all judgmental. I mean, religion itself is a type of spiritual practice. And the word spirituality doesn't even really specify anything. I think the real conflict comes from the amount of structure you like to receive from others versus the self. I think some people enjoy having more of a set of rules, so to say, and some people enjoy making a more exploratory connection. And this is going to be more or less extreme based on what group you want to be a part of. And there's going to be different ways of connecting in every group, but at the end of the day, our goal is to connect with source-like energy. I think a lot of the time, Not always, but a lot of the time, people have good intentions. I see people wanting to help each other, myself included. And so we start pushing our beliefs out there, and people don't always like that. But to answer your question, we have to first understand that we all have different beliefs, which in return will give us different realities. And I spoke about this last week, but there has to be an understanding that we are all free to explore our own belief systems, because that is what the purpose of life is, to be able to experience. And maybe you feel that you are being open and you're accepting, but that's not being reciprocated. And that's got to be a hard place to be. And children getting caught in the middle, yes, that can be sticky. I would suggest teaching your kids that all families have different beliefs, and that's okay. And the most important thing to do is to listen to their heart as they find what they believe in, and support them in finding that. You know, the journey of life is to find what you believe in. I would teach them to go out in nature and sit or play, and teach them how to listen to their thoughts. And teach them that there are thoughts that come not only from your head, but from your heart. And the heart is the space that we should listen when we need to make really important decisions. I also think maybe if you do some research on the specific religion that your ex follows and work to find comparisons between his beliefs and yours, it will help teach your children that some of these concepts can be explained and understood in different ways, but the universal truth of that teaching will oftentimes be the same. And this is a pretty big concept for young children to understand. But at the same time, children are so much wiser than we believe. Actually, before the age of 6 or 7, children are still very closely connected to spirit. They have not developed as many judgmental or stifling beliefs as we have as adults. I think around the age of 6 is when they start settling into their beliefs, which is oftentimes whatever it is they're exposed to, which is why I can see your worry. But I would actually use their situation as a positive thing, because they will have the opportunity to be exposed to parents of 2 different backgrounds. So I would incorporate that into helping them develop an open-ended belief that there's more than one right way, and any part of anything is worth adopting if it makes sense for them. And give them a neutral space where they can learn to connect with their thoughts and beliefs. You know, I mentioned nature would be a good place because they are directly connecting with spirit. And as young beings, they will have the opportunity to find what it is they themselves believe. Just support whatever it is they believe, and they will find their way. I think just supporting them being able to explore their thoughts and what feels right to them is extremely powerful, and something that kids don't always have. Support in general is going to be what they need, and it's going to empower them and allow them to have an open mindset and teach them that mommy and daddy can think differently, but they're supported in feeling safe to explore what they think. And if one parent is being supportive and the other is not, then use that in a non-judgmental way to teach them sometimes people will not always understand each other, but at least you will always be supportive of their needs. I mean, we can't control anybody but ourselves. And I think if you can at least hold space for them and just keep putting it back on them, like, well, what do you believe? That's all you can do at this point. I'll also mention that, remember, we all come in with soul contracts or goals or obstacles that we are to face. That's my belief, at least. And perhaps your children have designed this as something they need to experience, as well as both you and your ex. So maybe also understanding that will give some comfort. Okay, so next. How do you know if all this stuff is real? I'm not really sure if I buy into any of it. Well, this is an easy one. Whatever you believe is real. I mean, that's it. Like, that is the magic of life. We get to create and connect with what we want our reality to be. And this can be such a deep concept, or we can make it simple. I mean, I just came out with a really great episode on the science behind belief, so you might have not heard it yet, but I would refer to that. I mean, belief is all we have, and our perspective of anything is real and it is valid. So do you want to buy into it or not? Maybe spend some time buying into it and see if it makes you feel happy or inspired. And then spend some time on the other side of things and see how that makes you feel. You know, we all have different brains and ways of thinking. Some people are more literal and logical and need proof on paper. Some people are way up in the clouds and connect more with fluidity. Some of us are more right-brained or left-brained. And the universe is filled with different religions and different ways of being. And at the end of the day, you just have to connect with what resonates with you and what feels good to you. So I hope that answers your question. Okay, our next one is an astrology question. Why do sometimes I feel more connected to a Cancer when I am a Gemini? I can feel it most during retrogrades. Okay, I've been slowly learning about astrology for years, and I think it's so in-depth, it's something that someone would have to learn for their whole lives. But I do have an answer to this. However, I had to first reach back out to this guest and ask, do you have Cancer in your chart anywhere? Because I think something that we often see with astrology, at least out here in the West, is that we all talk about our sun sign as being our sign. And the sun sign is where the sun was positioned during our time of birth. So in this case, our listener's sun sign was in Gemini when she was born. So she's referring to herself as a Gemini. And this is what most of us look at when we read our horoscopes in the newspapers and when we look at memes about ourselves. However, your sun sign is just one aspect of you. The way it's been taught to me is that the 3 strongest signs we will notice are not only our sun sign, but also our moon sign and our rising sign. Our sun being a representation of our spirit, it's connected to our purpose, and it's a representation of our most conscious self. Our moon sign is just as powerful, but it's more about the subconscious self. It has to do with how we deal with our emotional side. It's all about our soul, and it rules us just as much as our sun sign does. And then we have our rising sign, which was always a bit confusing to me until I finally heard a good explanation of it. And the rising sign is more or less who we are to become as we step into our dharma and our purpose. And so when I asked this listener if she had any Cancer in her chart, she said yes, Cancer was her rising sign. So again, my answer for this listener is our rising sign is the characteristics of us that we are to step into as we become more aligned. We can think of our rising sign as our goal of who to become, because that sign is going to help balance out our natural spirit. So it's a quality that we're going to need to incorporate into our lives. So it would make sense that you are stepping into that self, and or you have a big piece of that sign as a part of you. Also, Gemini are all about communication, and Cancer is all about being intuitive and nurturing. That seems important in regards to retrograde periods because retrogrades help us expand. We often think of them as frictional periods, but if we work on our actions and thoughts during these times, that in return is what advances us. So retrogrades are very important to our growth. And perhaps lean more into your intuition, which is heavily Cancer, during these times or in general as you continue growing, because these are going to be important for your soul. Okay, next. How do you know if you are connecting with spirits or if it's in your mind? Such a great question. I think everyone goes through this phase, and I vividly remember feeling this all the time. And so my answer is, you have to surrender to trust. This is the key that will open the door. You have to make a conscious effort to accept any information you receive from your senses. And I would say start documenting it, because that's when I noticed it's not all a bunch of craziness. I've been keeping journals for the past 6 years or so, and I can't make this stuff up. And this is just what works for me, but thanks to me documenting any spiritual situations or coincidences and just allowing myself to automatic write, which is when you're in a relaxed state and you connect and just start writing without noticing what you're writing. Once I started to do this, it's wild. I mean, especially after having a body of work and lots of journals to go back and read, it became very prophetic for me, and it allowed spirit to better communicate with me because I became more conscious of noticing the magic around me. And when you write things down, it takes the energy of that situation and makes it more physical. So it creates a deeper imprint. And so try documenting everything, whether it's coming from outside yourself or within yourself. If you keep track of it, you will start to notice patterns, and you will start to feel a difference between what is coming from your brain and not your brain. You just have to observe and document it. At least in the beginning stages, when you're not sure of where it's coming from. Once you become more familiar with it, it becomes way easier to tell, and you don't have to document it as much. Unless you want to. I still do. But I vividly remember the day when I surrendered to this. I was in the car on the way to work, and I was listening to a podcast, and I'm like, man, I really want to better learn how to communicate with spirit. Again, I had the same question, but how do I know it's not just in my head? And maybe they were talking about it on the podcast I was listening to, or maybe it was just in my mind, but I sat there and I said out loud, I said, for the next 2 weeks, I am going to accept everything I get as communication. I said, whatever comes through, I vow to not dismiss it as my mind. I will not doubt anything for 2 weeks, and the rest is history. I stuck with it, and the communication I received was magical. I was so connected, and all it took was my surrender to the doubt of it. Literally, you can't doubt. Doubt holds no place in the spirit world. It's a gate that keeps you separated, and until you open that gate, you are going to struggle to connect. And for the record, who cares if it is or isn't true, or if it is or isn't coming from your mind? I mean, at the end of the situation, you're still receiving guidance and information. And this was something else that helped me move past the doubt. I mean, the reason we usually want to connect, other than it's really cool, is that we want guidance. And guidance can come in many different ways. So try this. Try documenting your experiences or coincidences and release yourself from doubt. Maybe try giving yourself a timeline for this as well. That really helped me. Like for a week or two, just trust and see what happens. So that's your homework. Now, this next question goes really well with that one. What is a coincidence, and why do people see them as a form of communication? I believe in the probability of chance and just don't see how this is connected to being spiritual. Okay, I got lots of downloads on this when I was first learning to communicate with spirit. And what I mean when I say downloads, it's like a click of deep understanding about something. Like sometimes it will be during a meditation, or sometimes I'll channel something through writing, or sometimes it will just come. Like, I don't know if any of you guys have ever watched the show That's So Raven back in the early 2000s. She was a high school character and she'd be at school and she would have these little psychic visions, which that is more of a prophetic thing. But her face when she got a vision was like, a frozen daydream face. And that's what I always think of when I'm getting one of these downloads. But to answer your question, the way I understand it is that coincidences are more or less of a crossing of energetic wires. And when wires cross, it's seen as a way of communicating because they catch our attention. And to be honest, that's all spirit has, our attention. You might have heard me say before, spirit does not speak the same way we humans speak. And of course, it depends on who's communicating with you. Is it a past relative, a guide, or just the spirit of life? But it's very difficult for something not physical to just all of a sudden grab your hand and say, hey, I'm right here. This is what you need. This is where you need to go. That's just not how it works. Nor should it, because we all have free will. And although we have guidance by spirit, this life is for us to experience our independence as a soul. So the best way for spirit to communicate is to get our attention. And we have the free will to choose if we want to accept it or dismiss it. And I talk a lot about this in my early episodes, especially the speaking with spirit one. But if you start to pay attention to what these coincidences are, you might be more able to accept it as communication. Again, in the last question I just got, I was talking about documenting your coincidences. Seriously, try that, and I bet you'll start to see that these coincidences are less and less random. Also, if you're having trouble trusting, try asking spirit to show you things. Again, connect with whatever you feel comfortable with, or whatever you believe in, but ask something and give it time and allow yourself to be receptive to receiving. Like, don't just ask for something and then when you see it, disregard it. I mean, that's very common, especially in the beginning. But if you want to try this as an experiment, give it a real shot. Ask for something specific. It can be an item, or to see something, or to experience something, whatever. Just start with something. Show me a blue diamond somewhere, and I bet you'll see it. Or you can say, show me a blue diamond 3 times. I'm telling you, it will open you up. But 2 things to understand are, 1, spirit doesn't have a concept of time like we do. So if you're like, hey, show me a blue diamond in the next 2 hours or 2 days, they may or may not be able to follow that exactly, but it will be close. And 2, I know the flip side of this, which is also probably what you're asking, is the question of, well, if I ask for a blue diamond, I'm only going to see it because I'm looking for it. But I'll just say from my experience, the only time I actually see something that I've asked for happens when I forgot about it, and then that's when I'll see it. And I won't go into too much detail about this because, like I said, I have a whole episode on it, but the 2 things that I look for when communicating are timing and repetition. The actual timing of when you see something in itself is how I pick up on if it's communication. Like if I know I was needing guidance, and then I look up and see something, that's the crossing of wires. Or if we keep seeing something over and over again, that's the crossing of wires. And this is how spirit manipulates energy to communicate. We're always being guided to and from things in our lives. We just have to pay attention. So I hope that kind of gives you a perspective on that question. Definitely go listen to the Speaking with Spirit episode for more on that. Okay, next one. This one is also deep. We all think it, of course someone asked it. Can you speak on why people kill or do evil things? Why are people in poverty if God is all loving? Do you ever think there will be a time when humanity is at peace? Girl, ain't that the question? Okay, I actually do have an opinion on this, and it's my opinion. Of course, who knows? We all have different viewpoints, and all I can give you is mine. There's no right or wrong answer. But I always relate it to the idea that there is a reason each soul needs to experience whatever it is they are experiencing. And honestly, whether you believe in reincarnation or not, or believe in a higher power or just the chaos of life, I feel like what I'm about to say fits into all of that. When we think of how energy itself was created, which includes us, it starts with duality. In order for there to be one concept, such as love, let's say, we need to have the opposite for the original thing to be in existence. And that is something that might have to be digested. I've spoken on it before. But the answer for why there is evil in the world is because there's love in the world. And when we speak in terms of God, our creator, or just the void, which would be more of a physicist comparison to God, it is the void itself, God, that encompasses that of equal energy. So God, so to say, has an equal amount of light and dark, good and bad, positive and negative. That's where we get the personification of Adam and Eve, the masculine and feminine. Again, perspectives are what shape and deem these concepts to be what they are, so that is going to play into this. But God or Source has an equal amount of all opposites. And we ourselves are made in God's image, meaning we are all going to be created with opposites. And our perspective is what can alter the amount of this or that, or good or bad. And I think conflict occurs when we think God or life is supposed to be just one way. We create this idea for ourselves that certain things are right. And as far as why there is evil in the world and why people kill, I feel like the answer for that is that there is a connection to that particular spirit needing to experience its range of power, like a child wanting to test their limits or boundaries. And they may or may not even be conscious of this. And yeah, we can get into the psychiatry of it all. But at the end of the day, this is what it reminds me of. I mean, supposedly, one of the laws of life, which I do believe in, is that we all have free will. So we all have the right to experience anything we wish. And yes, that will have an effect on those around us. But when a soul chooses to kill, and I'm speaking more in the sense of murder, it's gotta be because in some way they are choosing to exercise their power, their boundaries. However, I don't believe that they just get out of it with clean hands. I just came out with a whole episode on karma, and it does touch on this a little. But whatever it is we choose to do and think will have an equal energetic exchange in some way. And I think we will have a time, again, my belief, when we are able to review our lives and the choices that we make. And so I do think the lives of any killers and those affected are in some way karmic. And as I've stated before, it doesn't mean that you killed someone, so now you have to be killed. It's not that black and white. It's just that there was something that situation held that is going to in some way benefit the souls involved. And we have to expand our mindsets to understand this. And in no way does it have to be happy or acceptable. Again, that's not what this human life is about. You know, I believe we are supposed to experience the range of emotions we have been given. It's all part of the human condition. And we can't have love without hate, joy without pain. And I do believe this earthly experience we have is in some way a school, because if not, we would be in spirit, where we don't have to experience pain and some of these lower vibrational feelings. So to answer your question on if the world will ever experience peace, you know, there's different theories on this, but I think the purpose of at least this physical three-dimensional life is not to necessarily have peace on earth, but peace within yourself. And how do we find peace within ourselves? Well, we have to learn how to produce it when things may not always be peaceful. And to produce peace means to produce unconditional love, which by definition is to love and accept all. No exclusions to what you do or don't prefer. And in order to learn how to produce this as a physical being, because I do think we have a better understanding of this in spirit form, it means we have to be born into different circumstances and learn how to transmute energy to what we prefer. So we have to learn how to accept the total of all. And it doesn't mean we have to like it. It just means we have to understand it. And so the same goes for poverty. First of all, I've traveled to some extremely poverty-stricken places. And I know this isn't always true, but those were some of the happiest people I've met. So that alone shows us that our life is what we make it. It's the belief we hold that can either hurt us or help us. Truly. As far as war, I think that's similar to the murder thing. We're going to have people who feel the need to exercise their power and authority. And it's going to come through in different ways. And I think if we can spin it and understand that we're all placed in different situations that may or may not be in our control, how the story ends, so to say, is up to us. The healing begins with us. And that in itself is an extremely powerful concept that I think we need to continue bringing awareness to. We all have to start with healing ourselves individually. Think of your family history. What are all the struggles your ancestors have been through? Do you realize by the way you live your life and the story you tell yourself, you are either healing or continuing their struggles? Every family tree in history has been through struggles, and I guarantee you can find any situation from one family's history and equate it to another of a completely different family with a different background. And as more and more of us become born on this planet, we have the power to transmute any historical pain with how we live our lives. And I think the question of if humanity is ever going to reach peace is not as important as can we individually reach peace within our lives. And that's for us to determine within ourselves. How do we want to live out this experience? What is the story we want to tell ourselves? So, I feel really good about that answer. That's what I personally think. Hopefully that's relatable. Okay, next question. And I actually did select this one to speak on after the last. But the question is, what is your belief on God? And to answer this, I'm actually going to share something I recently wrote because I think about this question all the time. And as I was meditating, it kind of splurged out one day when I was connecting with one of my angels. And so it says, when we pray to God, we are praying to the collective conscious of all. God is not a figure outside of us. God is the spirit created by us, and we created by it. God is the inner consciousness, and we are the outer. God is the subconscious, and we are the conscious. But as we experience our individuality, we at times lose the understanding that God is created from the hearts of all. No matter our perspectives or beliefs, it is a fractal of our all-encompassing God, because the inner-outer is a symbiotic relationship that feeds each other. The relationship between self and God is mimicked as the relationship between the conscious and the subconscious mind. Thought itself is what creates. Therefore, it is the thought of God, our Creator, that once thought us into being. Then, as we continue to grow and produce thoughts, we continue the creation and evolution of consciousness itself. It started with one thought, and it will continue to multiply into as many different directions as possible until it becomes fully expanded back into itself. This is the heartbeat of God, the collective. It mimics that of the self, because what we see in large scale is mimicked on the small scale. It's ratio. Not one way as many of us understand. God is all-encompassing. Every religion, every belief, every feeling, every act is God, because we cannot have God without all of the puzzle, all of the perspectives. To exclude any one thought, belief, or culture would be to not encompass all, therefore not encompass the totality of God. As we learn to accept, may we keep our morality true to thyself while holding the understanding that all is true. All is valuable. May we choose to adopt what we prefer, but in no way will it be more right or wrong than another who chooses differently, because God is all. And I agree with that. So that's what I think of God. Next question, is there a hierarchy to spirit life? I tend to not believe in the concept of some ruling over others or some beings knowing the right way. Another really good question. I was actually just talking about this with someone, and the way I see it is not so much about an organized system in which some are ranked above others. I think we are very familiar with this hierarchy because it's often explained this way, especially in a lot of the Abrahamic religions. But I think that's more so because that's just how our structured mindsets can understand it. And I think it's hard for us to wrap our heads around. But when I think of this concept, I think more in terms of expansion and contraction versus a ladder. More separated particles being that of more expanded souls, and more closely related particles being more dense, and that of more physical souls. And I'll explain that. But also the fact that every relationship holds symbiosis, which is that there is an equal exchange of energy or learning from each thing to thing. For example, as far as the more expanded versus contracted concept I just mentioned, I'll use the example of angels. When we hear about angels in a lot of religions, it's as if they are a step higher than us, but like not as far up as God. I think that's a common idea. The way I see it, however, is not that they're a step above us or a step smarter than us. I just see them as having a more expanded viewpoint than us, like both literally and figuratively. And we have a more fixed or contracted viewpoint. And that's because of the human experience and the brains we have. However, the relationships we have with our angels not only benefits us, but also them. We both learn from each other. It's not just one-sided. I like to equate this to a child and a parent. Like, we think we adults know best because we're older and we're bigger, but in reality, both the parent and the child are constantly learning from one another. You know, our angels get to live through not only their perspective, but through ours. And we can learn to receive guidance from them and expand our viewpoint, but they are also learning through our experiences of having all of these emotions and humanistic qualities that they don't have. So they have the ability to experience the more focused or fixed perspectives through us. And so it's not like a ladder that we have to work our way up to the top, but more so this sphere like an onion, where each layer is connected to each other and needs each other to create the whole onion. It's an inner-outer relationship. And I agree with you. I don't see it as one ruling over the other or one being more right or more moral. It's an expanded versus a focused viewpoint. And each layer, so to speak, is just as vital as the other. And it's all connected. And it's always evolving. And it keeps circling and encompassing and feeding itself. Life gives life to life. Hopefully that made sense. Okay. Next, I have some really good psychology questions. The first one is, what does the concept of the self mean to you? Like in a spiritual sense versus clinical psychology sense. We learned about the self a lot in school, and there's lots of different definitions in all my psychology classes. Okay, the self to me is a fraction of our entire consciousness. I believe all beings, all energy, at its core is one, and everything is connected. And I think I might have even used the analogy of grass before to explain this, but I think of all of us beings as blades of grass that get to live and hold out our own perspective and reality. However, we're all energetically connected at our core, and I will refer to our core as being God or source or the void. And I think the reason for each of us getting to experience the self is because of the way consciousness itself grows. In order for consciousness to grow, it needs to experience the all. Because to understand the totality of life, the more experiences each of us individually have, it adds to the truth of all that is all. And the more differentiated our experiences are, the better. And thus, the bigger consciousness will grow. The more it and we will expand. It's like the way a tree grows. It keeps branching out, and it just keeps splitting into more and more of itself. This is in some ways a more physical concept, but it's no different than our family trees. We are all attached to bigger branches, which we can deem to be our family. But if you keep tracing every branch back further and further, you will see that we are all part of the trunk. And then what we see above, we see below. What we see within, we see without. And so if we think of a tree, what we see above can be a representation of our conscious physical self, the blades of grass, but we also have a subconscious self, which will mimic the roots of the tree and have a similar branching system. So within each of our selves, we have a higher self, and this is the part of us that is connected to spirit. And it keeps us connected between our physical and spiritual self. And that's why tapping into our higher self, which is represented by the roots, the subconscious, is beneficial because it is our access to spirit. So I have no idea how this was discussed in your psychiatry classes, but the concept of the self to me is my personal perspective in relation to the perspective of the other branches on my tree. Okay, next question. How can you relate spiritual dream analysis to Sigmund Freud's theories on dreams and the subconscious? Is there any relation? Okay, and this one might be kind of a lame answer because I have not researched Sigmund and Freud's theories, but the one thing I'll bring up or ask is, does Freud bring spirituality into dreaming? I'm super ignorant on his teachings, but I know for me, it's all about using our dreams to connect with our higher self and therefore the spirit side of life. Again, as I was just saying, when we do this, we can grasp a more expanded viewpoint of our situations, which of course is going to be beneficial for us. As far as how he interprets dreams, I really don't know the differences between him and I. And in all honesty, I think people should explore all kinds of ways to dissect their dreams. I guess I heavily rely on using items, characters, settings, and feelings as personifications or clues. Like if you pull out any one thing from a dream, what does that thing represent to you? And then to take that further, how is that thing acting or moving in relation to the other things or feelings in your dream? But I think it should be very open-ended, and it's for people to connect with on their own because we're all different. And I hate that I can't really answer this, but I would say maybe the difference is how I bring in spiritual principles or awareness in my dreams. I don't know. I'm not sure. I just really like bringing mysticism into our lives. And I think the dream state parallels our physical life. And I think our physical life is playing out our conscious brain, and the dream state is playing out the subconscious brain. And they're both running together and are open for us to tap into at any time. So that's all I can say about that one. Our next question is about manifestation. How does it work? I don't understand how I can just visualize something and have it appear. Seems like luck or chance that this actually happens. Okay, well, the first thing is I sense doubt. And that's not going to fly when manifesting. The point everyone is trying to make when they teach manifestation is that you have to live in what you desire and feel as if you already have it. And therefore, it is yours. But you also can't try to assume it's going to come in the way you're thinking of it. This is where most of us block ourselves. Sometimes we think we know the how to obtain what it is we want, but it's the how that we don't know and that we often get stuck on. We have to zoom way out and think about what it is this thing is going to give us. I want a relationship. Why? Because I want love or companionship. Okay, so let's focus on the love or companionship and work on producing that from the inside so we can have it on the outside. Remember, like attracts like. The frequency you emit is what you are going to receive. This is how to manifest. Learn what is the root of what you desire and start producing that within. You want love? Give love. To others, yes, but also to yourself. If you want companionship, be a good companion to those around you and to yourself. Because when you produce something, you feel it. And when you feel it, that's what we mean when we say you live in it. And when you live in it, that's when we catch a ride on that frequency and get to experience what that frequency is like. Because we're magnetic to that of likeness. And that's when we become of that thing, meaning we have manifested it. It's all about changing your frequency to that of like energy. So take the root of what you want. That thing is going to emit a frequency. Trace it all the way back to its root concept. Love is an easy example. You want love, so you produce love within, so you therefore emit it, therefore you are it, therefore you have it. Because through learning how to produce it, which is most of the challenge, you have attracted it, which is the process of manifesting. It's really interesting. Think of what it is you want and feel yourself producing it. then you can live in it to obtain it. Okay, this is our last question. If we learn to use these tools to manifest, how do we know what it is we desire? Where does desire come from? And how do we know if it's coming from a worthy place? Okay, another deep one. So where does a desire come from and how do we know it's worthy? Okay, I think desire comes from our heart. I think the point of that feeling we have that we call desire should be used as our compass. And I know you're asking if it's worthy or not. Again, this is based on what you believe. Look, as far as what's moral versus not, I don't think we're ever going to make everybody on this planet happy all the time with all of our choices. And I've thought about that before and it stresses me out. I think the point is to just do what feels right to you. Again, life seems to be about balance. We should be allowed to want things for ourselves. That's why we're here, to have an individual experience. And I don't think there's anything selfish about that, if that's what you're feeling. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but it sounds like you're not sure if your desires are worthy. Maybe you feel like you're being selfish, and I say that because I've thought that before, and I always really want to make others happy and feel comfortable. I don't like to ruffle feathers. I want to be liked. And these are thoughts I used to carry and still kind of do at times. And that's what this sounds like. If that's what I'm catching, I would say go to your belief systems. Do you not feel worthy of obtaining what it is you desire? Are you in a place where you are trying to not desire anything? I would challenge you to ask yourself, what is your definition of desire? Do you think desire comes from a selfish place? I like to think of it, as I was saying, a compass. A couple weeks ago, I spoke about us following our passion because I think that's linked to our purpose. To me, passion and desire is one of the same. I think we are given desires because they bring us closer to what we need. And let's say you desire something that's maybe not good for you. Well, go on that ride and play it out. Sometimes we need to go down a path because it gives us a better understanding, or it leads us to where we actually need to be. But we couldn't get there unless we took that little detour. And so sometimes I think we put too much pressure on ourselves. And I don't really think there are good or bad choices for us, because whether we deem it to be a good or bad choice, that choice is still progressing us on our life path. But I personally don't think desires can come from a bad place. And I say that openly because, back to the murder question. If someone desires to do something harmful, it is what it is, but I think that is tied to that person's sole purpose for that life. And so when I think of it in this way, I think desires themselves show us the path to reaching our life's purpose. And I vote for you to follow it, whatever it is. I really hope that helps. So with that, we have answered all of today's questions. If you have more, I would love to do another Q&A episode in the future. So please send in any more questions you have on any of my social media platforms, or send an email to info@inaspiritualsense.com, and I will make sure to answer them on a future episode. For now, however, that's all I got. I hope you enjoyed this episode and use it to inspire those around you. And I'll see you next time on In a Spiritual Sense. For those looking to connect further, please feel free to send emails to info@inaspiritualsense.com or hit me up on Instagram, where you can find weekly inspiration and updates. I look forward to connecting with you.